Hi guys, happy Sunday. I hope that you have had a great day. It has been super rainy and stormy here today, and I've been sitting on the couch reading a good book for most of the day, which is perfect because today we're talking all about book talks. So I wanted to talk with you guys a little bit how you can use book talks during your read aloud to help boost engagement. And the reason I love book talks for a variety of reasons. One of them is that it sort of mirrors what we do in real life. And if you think about it, anytime you read a book, if you've read a book that is such a good book and one of your favorites, you naturally want to recommend that to your friends. And a lot of times the books that you decide to read are based off of recommendations from friends that you are in a book club with or your neighbors. And so incorporating book talks into your classroom helps sort of prepare our students to have authentic conversations about books in real life as well. And then the other thing that I love about it is anytime that we can have our students doing most of the work, we are going to have engagement. And so because during a book talk, the students are the ones that are doing the talking, they're the ones doing asking the questions, they're preparing for it. They are the ones that are doing the heavy lifting, which means it's naturally going to increase engagement. So I'm going to go ahead and make my screen a little bit larger here so that way you can see more of my slides. And so first of all, if you've never done a book talk in your classroom, they are super simple, and really basically what it is just a preview, or think of it like a book commercial. And anybody can give a book talk. You can have your students give book talks. You can give a book talk. And you want to make sure that they're giving the preview based off of a book that they've read. So you want to make sure that they've read the whole book or you've read a whole book. And then you want them just to share a snippet. I usually have my students share like their most favorite part. They give a summary. And then the big thing is you really want to have them sort of sell it and pitch it. Why should their classmates read it? Why should their friends read it? So you sort of want to teach them how to give a book talk, but really all it is a book preview or a book commercial to help encourage your students read a wide variety of titles. So the reason why you should incorporate book talks, there's a couple reasons, but one of them, it is such a great way to create book buzz in your classroom. If your students are talking about books and they're sharing the books that they enjoy reading, or if you're sharing books that you've enjoyed reading, then naturally those are the titles that classmates are going to want to read. So anytime that you can have a student authentically talk about a book that they've read, other kids are going to want to read that book as well. Another reason why they're so important is because it helps your students contribute to your classroom environment that's centered around literacy. So it's a great way for your students to feel like they're contributing to the learning that's going on. They're contributing to this literacy environment that you're creating, and it's a great way for them to get buy-in. So it engages your students, it promotes students to read a variety of titles, and they're tons of fun. So those are some of the reasons why you should be incorporating book talks into your classroom. So if you've never done a book talk before, they're really not that difficult to get started with. What I suggest you do is, first of all, teach a mini lesson to your students. And you might want to actually teach a couple mini lessons because there is definitely some prep work that goes into it, or there should be some prep work. So I suggest that you teach a mini lesson to your students, explain to them what a book talk is, and then model it to them. So you would give a book talk yourself, and there's no right or wrong way. You can sort of pick and choose how you want them set up in your classroom. If you want your students to do a book review, if you want your students to share a summary, if you want your students to share their favorite part, you can decide how you want them structured, but you want to model what that looks like. And then you also want to teach your students how to prepare for it, because it's not necessarily just them giving a summary. Like I said, there's some sort of like salesy, commercially things that are involved with that. But you also want to teach your students when they're presenting to their classmates, that sort of looks different than if they're having just a conversation. So you want to teach them how to make good eye contact. You want to teach them how to use a presenting voice. You want to teach them the type of information they should share. Some kids can talk really, really long and be long-winded and go off on long tangents. You sort of want to prevent that from happening. And so you want to give them a structure. You want to let them know how long it should be. I typically like to have my students hold the book. And so you want to teach your students, how do you hold a book in a way to where their classmates can see it? So sort of think about how you want your book your book talks to be structured in your classroom. And like I said, there's really no wrong way to do it. There, whatever you think is important and whatever you want your students to share, you can sort of come up with a template for your students and just have them use that when they're planning. But you definitely want to model what it looks like, and you want to teach them the planning process, and you want to teach them the presenting process. And then you also want to teach your students sort of the purpose behind it and what they should do with the follow-up. So the whole idea of why we do book talks in our classroom is because we want other students to read those titles. We want other students to have interest. So if you want to have a Q&A time, then maybe you teach your students the type of questions they should ask. So just sort of think through what you want this to look like in your classroom. And then all of those things you definitely want to teach to your students before you get started with book talks. Now, there are a couple tips that I have that is going to make it just a lot more fun and a little bit more efficient. So first of all, make book talks a regular part of your read aloud time. I found that if we always did one book talk at the start of our read aloud, they take just 2 to 3 minutes, so they can be really short. But reading aloud is one of the things that I did every single day to my students. And so if you start with a book talk, then that means by the end of the year, you will have done 180 book talks in your classroom. So that means your students are all doing maybe 3 to 4. And it's just, again, thinking about if you have a book talk every day, that's 180 new titles that your students are exposed to, which I just think is so important. So make it a regular part of your read aloud routine, or it could be one of those things where it's like every day when you come back from lunch, you do a book talk, or every day after recess, you do a book talk. But try to find a time to squeeze it in. And like I said, they're short, they're 2 to 3 minutes, so they don't need to be that long. One of my other favorite tips is inviting special guests to come in and give a book talk to your class. Invite your principal, invite your secretary, invite the cafeteria workers, invite your parents, invite their previous teachers to come in. Really, you can invite anybody to come in, and students love it when they see other members of the school community coming in and sharing tips about or sharing their favorite book. So this is easily a way that you can engage your entire class or your entire school community by asking them just to share their favorite book. And if you're teaching virtually, all of these things still work. You could easily ask like your principal or your school nurse just to record a video of them talking about their favorite book, and you could share that with your class. So it also doesn't have to necessarily be live if you're teaching virtually, or if you can't get guests to come into your classroom. But definitely think about try to incorporating or inviting special guests just to come in and talk about their favorite book with your class. Another thing that I love doing is to create a wait list for students to read that book after the book talk is done. So like I said, once students have given a book talk, regardless of the title, I can pretty much guarantee that other students are going to want to read that book. And especially if you create a wait list and you keep it limited and you say the first 5 students to sign up are going to get to read this book. And then if you give them a time frame, kind of like they check it out from the library, because there's a wait list, they only get to have that book for, if it's a picture book, for 24 hours, if it's a chapter book, maybe a week. But if you create a wait list, and this literally could be as simple as writing the title on the board and putting a numbered list, and it's the first 5 students to sign up for it. But if you create a wait list, this again is creating that sort of sense of urgency and that sense of importance, that this book is important and we want to read it. And you really want to be the first to read it. So if you've never done a wait list, I would encourage you to try it. They're tons of fun, and they're just a great way to create that buzz and excitement for your students. Another thing that I love doing is using the book talks to turn it into a sort of bulletin board display, as well as kind of a visual catalog of all the book talks that have happened. So when students are finished, I would just take a picture of them holding that title, and then you can put those up near your classroom library. If you're online, you can create a Google folder or using Flipgrid, but some way for other students to go back and remember all of the book talks that have happened, because maybe they weren't able to read that book at that time, but if they remember, a book that a classmate talked about earlier in the year, they might be motivated to read it. So it's just a fun way to keep track of all of the titles that your class has talked about and shared about in your classroom throughout the year. So the last thing that I want to leave you with is just this idea that book talks are just such a great way to engage your students. And I found this quote and I thought it was so, just inspiring, but just this idea of students who find their voice They're valued and empowered, and they're more likely to take risks and exercise that voice. But doing so requires educators to find connection points for students to authentically express themselves. And book talks are one way that you can help your students find their voice, and not just talking about books, but talking about other things that are important. But if students are shy, or if they're reluctant, or if they don't know how to contribute to classroom conversations, giving them practice in a very structured sort of way, like a book talk, is going to help them feel more confident and comfortable when it comes time to being able to have discussions about bigger topics, or feeling like they can take a risk and contribute to the classroom community in a bigger sort of way. So just keep in mind that even the book talk, the act of having your students practice giving a book talk, can have an impact on your classroom community that goes in a much bigger way beyond just your reading block. So those are some tips and tricks when it comes to incorporating book talks into your classroom. If you have not done them, I would encourage you to try them this year. Like I said, they can be done whether you're face-to-face or virtual, and they're so much fun for students and for teachers, and they're such a great way just to engage and actively involve your students in creating a classroom that values literacy. So hopefully some of these tips are helpful, and you guys have a great start to your week.